Hello and welcome to Kast. I'll be your host, Kalis, along with my co-host, Boojum.
Hello.
We also have our round table with ALS. Okay, Bill.
I promise not to bash on my keyboard this time.
Connor.
Ayo.
Hughcast.
I'm here.
And Kippeth.
Heyo.
Alright, we're having a special Kast today where we'll be focusing on a newer robot game called MAV, or Modular Assault Vehicle. It is a mech building game where you build your mechs like Legos and unleash destruction on each other. It has a lot of us at Kong excited, and we're lucky enough to be joined by Chad Modlin, who is the creator of Bombdog Studios, which is responsible for MAV.
Hi.
Alright, Chad, why don't you tell us a little bit about MAV from your point of view?
MAV is just kind of the mech game that I always wanted to play. I've been a huge fan of mech games, but none of them really scratched the specific itch that I wanted. I always wanted to be able to kind of have that mix of mech action, but also being able to kind of make my own mech to look and played exactly how I wanted. And that's really what I'm trying to capture with MAV.
That sounds awesome, and that suits a lot of us here at Kong. We do like our stompy robots, but customization is always a big thing. Alright, well, we have a large list of questions for you that I hope you're prepared to answer in depth, and let's get started. My questions are broken down into sections. The first is going to be about your mechs, your MAVs, so to speak. So the first question is, how large and stompy will the quad and hexapod MAV bases get, the mobility parts? What role do you see these types of MAVs playing? Will individual legs be damageable on quad and hex MAVs?
Well, for the large and stompy aspect, they will be, well, especially the hexapod will be the largest mobility base in the game for the normal MAVs. The quad legs will be about the same size as what the tank treads are right now, which is actually about twice the size of a normal tank. So they'll be pretty big. You'll definitely be able to tell when somebody's running the quad base or the hexapod base, especially. And the roles that I'm hoping to see these in is I'm actually kind of changing up the quad base role a little bit. A lot of times whenever you think of a quad, you think of a slow, heavy hitter, and I'm going to change that up a little bit. I think that the quads are going to be better suited for a soldier role where you have a lot of mobility with the quad, with some extra stability that you wouldn't get with biped legs. They're going to be a little bit more energy intensive, so they're going to have a whole little bit of a different play style. But I really see them being for the high mobility soldiers that want to kind of get in there and hit with these hard weapons with a lot of recoil. So like a lot of cannon builds and stuff like that will be probably wanting to go with quad legs. The hexapod legs are going to be the city on, legs. They will have the highest weight capacity. They are going to be very slow. They're going to be heavily armored. They're going to be for getting into a position that's hopefully not too far away, and more than likely just raining down indirect fire. So just also I can see a lot of defenders wanting to go with the hexapod legs where you just are trying to hold a point. There's not really a need for you to move up into the battlefield. You're just defending a single location, and you can just put as much armor and weapons on there as you can, and you'll be able to hold off like 2 or 3 of the soldier mechs just by yourself at the sacrifice of the mobility. As for the individual legs being damageable, that's not a system that's currently in the game. It does sound pretty cool. I don't know if I want to get that far into the simulation of everything like that with like being able to leg out one of the biped legs and having them limp and stuff like that. It gets pretty complex with that. But that is a really cool idea, and that would be awesome. It would be another huge benefit to going with a multi-leg base, is that you're less prone to being taken out by the legs.
That sounds pretty amazing. I like the fact that the hexapod is going to be your rompy and stompy for sure. Kipeth, you had something to say about that?
You said with it being the fortress on legs, are you still planning to keep the lighter mechs being able to just run circles around the larger mechs, or is that aspect of balance going to change?
No, that aspect of balance is always going to be there. One of the cool things about the system I've set up is every stat on every leg is completely tunable to make, even if it has the same weight capacity and the same speed, there's a lot of other things that can be tweaked and changed that make it play completely different. One of those is the rotation and aiming speed that you have is really dependent on your leg type. So you can go with the hexapod legs, which might really limit how fast you can spin around to try and shoot somebody that's running circles around you. So I think there's still going to be a lot of balance to be able to keep that role warfare in there. And even at the minimum, if you can get a scout and a really light, fast guy in there to spot and find this really slow, immovable guy, you can just get your support to rain down fire, indirect fire on him, and he's not going to be able to get out of the way to do anything about that.
That sounds pretty good. Bill, you had something to mention about this.
Oh yeah, when we're talking with the hexapods kind of being a lot larger than the other ones, might we see some larger cockpit styles? Like, I know the largest now is heavy. Might we see very heavies soon?
Actually, yes. I'm one of the things I've been kind of working on in my free time is fleshing out the MAV universe and kind of the starting point. I have some of the backstory, but what's important to this conversation is I've been working on the manufacturers, basically the part manufacturers, who are actually making these parts that you're building the MAV with. And the very first one is going to be a construction manufacturer that is making parts for the MAVs, and they're going to focus on very heavy, very robust parts. You'll see a couple cockpits from them that look at they're pulled straight off of like a bulldozer and just super tough, super heavy. They're going to just dwarf all the other parts. So there'll be a walking cockpit that is just super hard to destroy.
All right, that sounds awesome. For the next question, it's kind of a follow-up. Speaking of Stompy, would very large, very heavily armored MAVs be possible to build use in the future, or possibly small 1 to 2 weapon MAVs, basically larger and smaller mobility parts?
The mobility bases are all probably going to be proportional to each other. So you won't ever get one that's like twice the size of the smallest one. They're all going to be fairly universal, and a lot of that is because all of the parts are interchangeable. They kind of need to all work together in the same combination. It'd be kind of like if you went too big, it would be whenever you mix those the children's Legos, they called like Duplo, I think, with the actual Legos, that just wouldn't work very well. Now, with that said, there will be super massive MAVs that you're able to build and deploy in campaign mode, or the faction war, which those are going to be kind of like super weapons and big boss MAVs that will be 5 to 10 times larger than a normal MAV.
That sounds awesome. All right. Kipeth, you had something to say about that?
Boss MAVs sound absolutely awesome.
Pretty much. All right. Kast.
If there's one thing I'd like to see about boss MAVs is that right now with weapon aiming and how it is, I don't really see how boss MAVs would be able to aim very well, as you can't really move weapons, and being so big, all your weapons would have a hard time hitting smaller mechs, wouldn't they?
Well, they would not be limited to the same configuration that a normal MAV would be. They would probably be more attributed to like a walking city. I mean, they're going to be very large, so they'll likely have multiple turrets and aim points that can all target at once. So there's a debate on whether or not they'll be player controllable, but they will be player deployed. So you can deploy it and then go into battle alongside of it. while basically the AI controls the big boss MAV and helps you take over the territories and everything like that.
Awesome. All right, then. Next question we have is, will there be any physics? Specifically, will MAVs ever fall down or tip over from huge explosions, collisions, or melee?
During the course of battle, I'm probably going to lean towards saying no. Not because doing the physics or making them fall down is very difficult. It's actually pretty easy to do. The difficult part comes from making them get back up, because they don't have any arms. There's no standard configuration. They might not have any weapons or anything. You could literally have a MAV that's just wheels in a cockpit if that's what you wanted to run. So there's no real easy way to figure out how they would actually be able to get up from falling down. Now, if we're talking about whenever they're dying, yes, that's something that I definitely want to do. I want to make the death and destruction as beautiful as possible.
Yeah, definitely. I can see from a gameplay perspective why you'd want to do that. All right, next question. Right now, the animations seem rather stiff and stilted. Do you have plans on adding further articulation to the different parts of the MAVs to let them appear more dynamic and weighty in their movement?
Yes, the animation has been kind of a constant point of critique, so I know that it's not the best. There's also a couple of systems that run on top of the animation that make it a little bit less pretty. You have the IK running on top of it for matching the feet to the terrain and everything like that. As well as because of the way that aiming works, if the mobility base moves a whole lot, that actually affects your aiming. But I do want to get somebody to come in and animate them better than I can. Luckily, I do know a lot of animators, so that's kind of on the list after we get models.
Helps having those game industry contacts, I'd imagine.
Yeah, and especially with animation, I can probably pull 50 animators out of a hat if I needed to.
Well, that's good news for sure. Next, will there be a heat system, specifically for like either the weapons or the MAV itself?
Yes, I have the very basics of it coded in, and it's designed on paper. There will be a heat system. It's a per part heat. So it's primarily going to be used for heat vision, thermal imaging, and stuff like that. So I have to track the heat anyway. But basically, the part can heat up, takes in the ambient air temperature. If you're doing stuff to it like catching it on fire, then it will heat up, and once it gets past its heat damage threshold, it will actually start taking damage from being too hot, and the heat will spread throughout the parts, and there'll be different ways to prevent that. So one of them will be having radiators attached to parts, so you can have a radiator attached to like your cockpit that makes sure that your cockpit doesn't get too overheated and start taking damage, and also some fire suppression auxiliary parts that will kind of, when activated, spray your whole MAV down with some water or fire suppression foam that will take the heat down and cool you down, prevent you from taking damage.
Wow, you definitely do have a heat system. Would any of these radiator parts, do you see them working as almost like a cloak for heat vision or something like that?
Yeah, exactly. They would cool you down enough to where you would not be able to be detected on heat vision or on thermal imaging, depending on how much heat you're looking at. And that's kind of the whole heat system really plays into the thermal imaging, and like the flamethrower weapon. And so somebody could like do a drive-by with a flamethrower, just tagging essentially all of the enemy team to get them, heated up, which allows them to be lit up on all of their allies' thermal imaging, and they can start raining down fire that way.
That sounds great. Bill, you had something to say about heat?
Yeah, it sounds like the with the heat, was that also possibly a way for you to balance weapons as well? I mean, if you might add, like rotary cannons or something like that, might heat build up affect that rate of fire?
Yeah, that's definitely, well, the way that I would do it would be a little bit different. I would just have it to where each time you fire the weapon, it builds up heat within the weapon part itself. And so if you start firing too fast, you can literally blow the weapon up. I wouldn't necessarily want it to start slowing down, because I have to think about how easy is it to communicate to the player. So like if they have no idea what the heat system is, and their weapon just starts slowing down, it's a little bit harder to communicate than if they're firing too fast and I can just show the weapon heating up, and then they see the weapon starting to take damage. They get enough warning about what's happening. I think it's easier to communicate that way. Plus, nobody wants their weapon to slow down.
Sorry, go ahead.
No, nobody wants their weapon to slow down. Everybody wants to be able to just push it to the limit as much as they can.
Definitely. Kast.
Oh, you said something about having heat in the cockpit and drawing that away. Are you planning to have any kind of pilot effects for heat, like your pilot passing out or taking damage and your screen does something? That sounds interesting, wouldn't it?
Yeah, I think that's getting a little bit too far into the simulation category. I'm kind of walking a fine line between simulation and arcade, and there's a lot of the things about simulation that I do like, but it's not going to be a full-on sim.
All right, next question. Will rapid fire weapons ever jam, or any weapon in general?
Probably not. Again, I want it to be pretty universal that whenever you have a weapon, it's that weapon until it's blown up. I have some weapon degradation stuff in there with like the weapon cams and everything like that. But for slowing down or jamming weapons and everything like that, especially stuff that seems random, like a weapon jam is a random event, which really is not that much fun, because that, especially on a weapon, that can sway the course of a battle. And I don't want people to feel cheated just because their weapon happened to jam. Even if they're using a weapon that has a high probability of jamming, if it jams at the wrong time, people will feel cheated. I don't think that ever comes out feeling fun.
So no RNG to take over and screw everybody up. I can understand that, especially with the arcadey aspects that you're kind of aiming for, between that sim and arcadey. Plus, it keeps the weapons compartmentalized and probably makes things easier on you.
Yeah.
All right. Next question is, will there be any modules, parts, or tuning points that can alter aspects of a MAV's performance, such as speed enhancement or recoil reduction?
Yeah, this is one that I can't really answer to a strong degree, like with a definitive answer, because in the current design, I wasn't planning on it, but it is within the community something that a lot of people are asking for, and I tend to listen to the community whenever they get very vocal about something. We've also talked about having parts that you attach to other parts that kind of give them the boost. So that the tuning points or everything like that is a visual thing that you have on, which is also good because if it gets blown off, you can take away that boost. But for just like hey, I have 5 points and I can allocate them in speed or armor or whatever, that I'm still kind of debating about. I would want to lean away from it and go for more the visual route, but I've been wrong about stuff before, so if the community is really adamant about it, it's something that could make it into the game.
All right. Everybody loves a metagame, so yeah. All right. Next question is, what ways can you find the location of enemy MAVs or hide your own? Will there ever be an optical camouflage system that can hide your MAV? What about radar jamming or dummy signals? Decoy MAVs. Basically, information warfare is what I get out of it.
Yeah, there will definitely be some information warfare. There will be uplink systems which provide basically the comm satellite, or what would essentially be the radar, which gives you an overhead view and shows you where everybody's at. There'll be ways to expand your radar range. There'll be ways to mask yourself whenever you're in enemy radar range. There'll be ways to be able to mask yourself and the people that you're with from your enemy radar. So there'll be a whole lot of that for an optical camouflage system. Aside from just how you decide to paint your MAV, there won't be anything like coded in the game. I guess the best example of that would be like World of Tanks, where if you're hidden, that they actually won't render you on the enemy screen. I won't go anything that deep with it, but there will be a lot of information warfare on the mini map level. I'm going to call it the mini map, but basically the commander view will allow you to have a lot of information, and will be ways to influence what information you're giving away and what information you're gathering.
Well, that's cool. So information warfare, but no predator camouflage.
Exactly.
Aeolus.
Yes. Sorry, I was a little late on the roll call. One thing I wanted to ask you, going over this idea of information warfare, is, are you planning on utilizing a different sort of radar systems as well? Like in MechWarrior 4, for example, they used to use a passive and active radar system. Active radar gives you the longer range, but makes you more visible. Passive reduces your range, but it makes you easier to mask your presence. Are you thinking about implementing a similar system into MAV?
The way that I'm going to be doing it is going to be a little bit different. There will be basically anybody can be a commander, but to be a commander, you actually have to have the commander part, which is the ComSat part, which allows you to access the uplink network. And what that does is that gives you, so everybody has access to their map. They can pull up their map. But if you have the ComSat part, you can actually get a lot more information on that, and you can start, putting out waypoints that show up on everybody else's map. And you'll also be able to see where the enemies are at and get more information about where the enemies are, but only if they're within your range of your uplink network. I'm kind of coming up with these names on the fly, so forgive me if I get them mixed up or they sound terrible. So the uplink network will be something that you can expand. So scouts will have deployables that they can go out and put into the field wherever they think that they want to be able to monitor. And that all that information gets pulled back to anybody on your team that has the ComSat part. Now they can then relay that out or issue orders or set out waypoints and everything like that. But there won't be any kind of like mini map or anything like that for your MAV where you're getting radar information or anything like that. You'll either have to have the part that gives you that or rely on your commander to tell you where to go.
That is freaking cool. Thank you.
That is pretty amazing. I mean, it adds a certain strategic and tactical element that sounds like it'd be a lot of fun. All right, next question. Kickstarter says you plan to introduce melee. How will melee in general work? Would you consider swinging arms and/or actual melee weapons like blades or axes in addition to the mining theme melee, or is that not the direction that MAV wants to go?
I think that it's the swinging blades like axes and stuff like that, like an arm holding an axe, is outside the direction that I kind of want the game to go. And it also has a kind of a bunch of additional complexity to it because of the ability to put parts wherever you want, and how they would manage to swing from, like if you put it behind, facing backwards and everything like that. So I want to push the visual direction into as many cool things as possible. It's not just going to be 50 variations on a spike that shoots out. There's going to be some spinning weapons, some really cool things that go on, but they all kind of have to be compartmentalized into themselves. So as soon as you start getting things that require like an arc to be able to swing, it gets a lot harder to make sure that you can build with that and it won't cause just like massive graphics glitches whenever it swings, or maybe it swings and just destroys 3 of your own parts. But melee in general will work as just really close range weapons. The weapon system that I've created is really, really robust, and basically it can handle everything from a melee weapon to a rocket propelled grenade, and it's all the same code base. So
that sounds pretty awesome. We love melee, and you always want to hit things with when you're in a robot. So yeah, use your size and weight and whatnot. But that sounds pretty cool. All right, next question is, any plans on first-person view or more detailed HUD statistics? Example, showing health of your parts, health of enemies, etc.
Yeah, you do have the access to the health of your own parts right now. It's just not on screen at all times, because a MAV can have like 30 parts on it, and that just having your health on screen would take up the whole screen. So it's toggleable, but it's off by default. So you just press the key, pull it up, and check it. And also, while you're taking damage, the parts that are taking damage kind of pop up and show you the damage that they're taking. As for showing the health of enemies, I really want to kind of stick with this kind of low-tech sci-fi feeling, where it's a much more meaty combat. You don't have access to all of the detailed stats of your enemy. You just judge how he's doing by what's on fire, what's smoking the most, and that gives you an idea of how he's doing. So there's a little bit of limited information gathering. You're relying more on your intuition of counting the number of shots that you've put into him, or, oh yeah, those shots hit his legs are on fire, I'm going to focus my fire there instead of spreading the damage out all over the place. So because of that, the hit feedback and the damage feedback on the part and the MAV in the world is really important. But I don't want to have a whole lot of information stuff that you're just getting fed to you. I want you to rely on being a pilot and being able to get that information yourself.
So no really complicated computer systems detailing all the different problems and whatnot. Just work with what you got, and if he's got a big dent in him or he's smoking, go for that part. That's
Exactly.
cool. I like that. I really
Two
like
pilots and 2 giant robots, and you can figure out who's going to win.
Cage match style. Kippeth?
It's certainly a pilot by the seat of your pants kind of thing. I think it suits the setting quite a lot, where it's not high tech, it's people with modular machinery.
Yeah.
Yeah, basically people sticking on whatever they can find to make it work. All right, next question. Is weapon convergence something you're working on or intend to work on?
Actually, this kind of ties into what I was saying before. With the weapon convergence, it's not there by design. I know that kind of seems odd, but yeah, there is no convergence, and there won't be any, and that's on purpose, because I have probably the most robust recoil system ever that I've worked on before, and a lot of that is going to be just finding ways to tweak your own MAV and fine tuning and finding optimal stuff, instead of getting a module that unlocks faster weapon convergence, or convergence happens with these weapons or anything. You can get your weapons to converge yourself by where you place them, and taking advantage of the unique recoil stats, and just by playing and getting comfortable with your own MAV. And then you're like, man, I have these 4 cannons on the side and they're really good, but for some reason it seems like that 4th cannon shot is just always a little high. Maybe if I move that cannon up or to the side, or rotate it a little bit, the recoil will put it on target, and all of my shots will go right where I want them to. So it's going to be a little bit more of a visceral tuning. So actually moving parts around, playing around, seeing what works. And that's kind of why the convergence is not there.
Well, it sounds like you're definitely going to have to learn the idiosyncrasies of all the weapons and the MAVs. Kipeth.
Is the lack of weapon convergence trying to limit the amount of pinpoint damage you can do to parts? In MechWarrior, you had a lot of people using 3 or 4 weapons, were all converged on one point, and basically just killed someone.
Yeah, part of that is I do want you to be able to focus on a part to destroy it, but there is going to be a lot more damage spreading. There's going to be a lot more missed shots. It's not going to be 100% accuracy games unless you're playing as a sniper, and there are ways to make sure that all of your shots hit as a sniper and everything like that. So I'm not doing anything that really forces you to be inaccurate, but if you want to have a whole lot of weapons and want them all shooting at once and just focus on damage, you're going to be less accurate because of that, just because of the way that the weapon group system works and the lack of convergence. Or if you want to, you can go with really big weapons and just put one per weapon group, and you're always going to get 100% conversion by just shooting one at a time. So it's only whenever you start adding more and more weapons to a weapon group to try and really get a whole bunch of damage in that one shot that the convergence or the lack of convergence kicks in, and it kind of acts as a natural counterbalance to trying to shoot too many weapons at once.
I really like that approach to the low-tech sci-fi. I definitely appreciate it. Rather than letting your computers figure it out, you just have to do it by hand. All right, and for the final question for this section is, how will weapon types be differentiated so that they don't all feel the same and fill the same role? I know, tough question.
Yeah, man. Maybe if I give a good enough answer in this one, I'll change the entire gaming industry, because it seems to be a problem that everybody struggles with. I have a bit of a background specifically with this question, having been a big part of Borderlands and Borderlands 2, where I think that the design team there, I was not on the design team, but I worked closely with them. I just want to be clear about that. But I learned a lot from working with them on what you can do to make weapons feel different. And I think that Borderlands and Borderlands 2 did a really good job of that, of finding a way to make 5,000 different weapons actually feel like 5,000 different weapons. So part of that is just the way they feel whenever they're being fired, even if the damage is the same and the shot spread is the same, accuracy is the same, if you can change the way that they feel whenever you fire them, I think that has a lot to do with that, and a lot of that's going to come from just massive amounts of sound variation. Different stats are always going to be good. There's always going to be somebody that wants to change something a little bit different than somebody else. So I think that for the average player, they'll find their own set of weapons that they kind of prefer, but the kind of the key is that across the entire player base, nobody picks the same weapon. So as long as you don't have like a majority that are all picking the same weapon, and you've spread out the differentiation enough to where the majority of the player base is kind of picking different weapons, I think that's kind of the thing that I'm going for.
Oh, I could definitely see that. I mean, it's a real challenge. I mean, you have a lot of weapons already in the game, and there's a lot of choices. So it's not always apparent what does what, or if they're even going to be different when you fire them, like auto cannon, how do they work differently and such. This also, are you intending to have like different tiers of the weapons, or is there just like one level?
All the parts will have different tiers. This is kind of another thing that's been talked about on the forums and the message board a lot. But the current design is that there will be 100 tiers of parts, but the difference between each tier is not going to be so great. So even if you have tier 1 parts, you can fight against tier 10 parts, and they're not even necessarily going to just be patently better. You'll have to probably go up quite a ways before you get parts that are just the same part but better. But there will be some tiers, and a lot of that is to help with progression in the war. So whenever you're playing this persistent game mode, you'll have some part progression and everything like that. So you always kind of have a cycle of parts that you're wanting to try out and try new stuff.
All right, sounds like a lot of tiers. Kipith.
Is that part of the, you're saying the tier system, is that part of the upgrade system that you can kind of see the beginnings of in the parts at the moment? Occasionally you'll see there's a stable or boosted part.
Yes. One thing that you actually will notice is that right now there's a cost metric in the game, which is not being used by anything other than back-end stuff to actually calculate what tier the part would be. So as everything gets stuff added onto it, so there's, I have to back up to explain this a little bit, sorry. Every part is actually made up of sub-component parts. So like a weapon is the base, the barrel, the magazine, and the scope. And each one of those have different modifiers that they apply to the weapon and everything like that. And each one of those also has a cost that they bring to the weapon. And it's that overall cost that I'm using to calculate what the tier of the part is. And you can see that with the cost metric that's shown in the game. So you can see kind of, hey, that one looks like it's just better than that other one, or it looks, kind of a lot better. And then you can see the cost, and you're like, oh, that one's 700 in-game credits, and that one's 27,000 in-game credits. So there's actually, even though the stats don't seem like they're that big, there's going to be a huge difference between the actual cost. So you can already kind of see how I'm balancing that out a little bit in the current game.
All right, that's there's a lot of parts in there for sure. I'm gonna hand off the next section to Boojum.
Hi. That does sound like you've got some interesting progression going there. I have noticed the big differences in prices in some of those parts, so it's going to be interesting seeing how that unfolds going forward. For the next section of questions, it's all things centering on game modes, maps, server features, things like that. And the first one is there only going to be one world map with areas sectioned off that are into actual maps you play on, or are there going to be many distinct world maps? Currently, there's a large map with sections you can pick from.
Yeah, there will be one large world map that you pick from the territories to fight in and everything like that. Yeah, I'm trying to really grasp the question if there's mini maps. Now, there will also be mini maps because everybody that's hosting a campaign server or the war server, the persistent game mode, that will have a different map than all the other servers. It might not be, like the locations of the territories might be the same, but that's actually up for debate. Something that I'm talking about is it's the territory actually distribution is randomized whenever you start the server. But just the progression of the server will be different. So whenever you join that server, whoever owns whatever territory will be completely different as well. So whenever I first read that question, I was kind of a little bit yes to both accounts. I'm not sure how to answer.
Well, I think you've opened up some good topics. When you talk about these campaign servers and that each server has its own kind of persistence to it, what persistence is there? There's territory you mentioned. Is there anything else?
Yeah, actually everything that you do on that server will be persistent. So you'll have your own inventory of parts on that server. You'll have your own currency. You'll have your own faction affiliation on that server. So that is an isolated instance of the campaign. So it's everything you do there is persistent. I guess the best way I know how to describe it is kind of like if you play on two different Minecraft servers. the game that you have on each server is completely different than the other one.
Oh, that's interesting. When you talk about the persistence and all of those elements, um, is there going to be an official public server, or is it going to be community-hosted servers only?
There will be an official one for sure, but one of the core things I wanted to make sure happened with the game is that if for some reason something happened with me, or I could not continue running the official one, or maybe I go bankrupt and have to shut down shop or something like that. I didn't want the game to die with me. And so that's why I was very adamant about making sure that there could be community run servers. And hey, maybe the community does a better job of running the server than I do with the official one. It's happened with a lot of games before. So there will be an official one that I run and try and make to be the biggest one. But I wanted the community to be able to do whatever they wanted with the game as well. So they have the ability to run their own as well.
Okay. For our second question, how big will the maps be on average, and how long do you expect players to move around and set up before they actually make contact with the other team?
Map size right now is actually really dependent on the game mode. For arena game modes, I think the current map size is like 1.5 kilometers squared. For siege mode, it's going up to, well, no, that would be, yeah, 1.5 kilometers squared for arena mode and like 2 square kilometers for siege mode. And for campaign mode, I'm shooting for about 2.5 to 3, but it will depend on the map. You know, some of the maps just won't need that much space. But I've tested, I can go up to 3 square kilometers fairly easily. As for how long I expect players to move around and set up before the other team appears, again, very dependent on the game mode. Arena mode, that time should be anywhere between 5 and 30 seconds before you're shooting somebody else, because it's a very arcade, free-for-all, just kind of go in and blow people up game mode. For siege mode, where it's a bit more strategy to it, I'd expect you probably have anywhere between a minute to 2 minutes. Well, actually, probably anywhere from a minute to 3 minutes, depending on what mobility base you're using. So basically, how fast you are will determine when, you know, how fast you start engaging with the enemy. But, you know, if you're like 2 scouts running head at each other, you should pretty much run into each other after a minute or less. I think actually on one of the maps right now, it's like 45 seconds if they take a direct route.
Okay, thanks for the honest estimates. I know this is a work in progress, but that sounds pretty good. For our next question, we mentioned earlier boss MAVs. Could you comment more about that boss mode? Will it be a situation where a player could control a big MAV and a larger team of smaller MAVs fight against it? That's similar to Robocraft is why it's being brought up.
Okay. Yeah, really, it's going to depend on you know, a lot of undetermined factors on if the boss is actually player controlled. I would like it to be, even if it's just a kind of a general, maybe it's not a direct control thing, but you're issuing orders to it and it's kind of following those orders, I think would still be kind of cool. Would it, you know, big team of enemy MAVs coming and taking it on? For sure. And in fact, you can even deploy in to kind of reinforce your boss as well. So there's a lot of dynamics that can happen with that.
When you talk about reinforcing the boss, are you envisioning some kind of boss versus boss mode with players supporting?
Oh, wow. That's actually a really good idea, boss versus boss mode. I mean, with the current design, that would be possible. It would just become a technical thing on if it was a technical possibility, but I think that should be able to be doable. So, because the way that the boss would work is it's something that you deploy in the campaign mode, and it goes and attacks territories and helps you take them over. So people that are defending those territories will deploy against that boss and try and destroy it before it takes over their territory. And then you can deploy into battle as well to help, take them out, and, kind of, it becomes kind of a game of tug of war where you're pushing against each other. You're trying to push your boss further through so he can do as much damage as possible. And then, they could always counter deploy a boss as well, and you get two completely different battles. That's going to be crazy. That's going to be awesome. I'm excited about that now.
That does sound exciting. I understand this is just a concept at this phase, but we hope to see something good come from it. For our next question, about how many players do you expect to be in any given battle? Are there going to be any hard player limits, and where do you see those being?
The hard player limits are going to be just pure technical limits that we run into. So right now we have people that are doing tests with 32 players. Well, it's actually 31 AI players and 1 human player is what he was doing, which is actually even more intensive than having 32 human players. And the good news is the server seemed to be able to handle that okay. The client had a lot of performance issues because MAVs are currently fairly performance hungry, just from a game technical standpoint. They have a lot of polys and stuff like that. So optimization on them would make that to where that was more feasible. There's also a lot of server optimization that could go on to make 32 player battles, pretty easy, least achievable. What I probably see being more common would be anywhere between 6 and 12 people in a battle, on whatever, maybe it's 3 versus 3 or 6 versus 6. I think would probably be fairly common just whenever you get that many people together to play. But, as the game gets more popular, who knows?
Okay, we look forward to seeing that develop. From what little I've played, well, what I mean is that I haven't played any 32-player maps, but with smaller games, I could imagine it getting very crowded if there were actually 16 people a team. So we'll see how that works out. For our next question, will there be any escort or siege mode that's similar to like TF2's Payload module where you're escorting something along? We already talked about the boss battle, but what about something that's not a big weapon?
For something that's like a very scripted game mode like that, probably not. I have, the game modes that I've already set out to do, that would be something that could be a possibility to add on. A new game mode would not be a huge and massive undertaking to add on, but it would probably not be something that I wanted to tackle, at this time. But yeah, maybe if that's a popular thing that people want to play, I have no problem.
Okay. Next question. Could it be possible to summon and control additional assets? There's some ideas here. Would you ever be open to the idea of deployable NPCs? Maybe pinging a location and then like half a dozen NPC tanks or helicopters in inventory deploy there via airdrop, or they come from off the map, and then giving them attack and move orders, kind of like you can with turret deployables. How about things like passive countermeasures that would fight against them, like anti-infantry, anti-air? So all these NPC deployable assets. What do you think of that idea?
Well, there definitely will be NPCs in the game, through all levels, whether it's bosses or I mean, sorry, bots. But even in campaign mode, the persistent mode, you'll be able to hire NPCs to join your faction and basically being your wingman, and you can have them deploy with you. As for giving the commands and everything like that, you can do that with the commander role. So if you have the commander parts equipped, and we kind of talked about this with the information warfare, you'll be able to set up the waypoints and give them specific commands that the AI or the NPCs will follow and take part in. So there will be a little bit like that. As for pulling in other things other than like the MAV or just the deployables, like the tanks and helicopters and stuff like that, there's not a current plan for the tanks and everything like that, but I think that they would fit in pretty well. And it would be kind of cool to see that just as a size comparison, you know, like just going up and towering over the tank and blowing the crap out of it would be fun.
Kipeth, you had a comment?
This was just on the deployables. Are there any changes being made to the garden shed?
Yes, that is complete temporary artwork made by yours truly, and there will be a professional artist that handles that.
Kalis?
Yeah, speaking of scale and whatnot, it's always important in big robot games to show a sense of scale. Were you intending to have any kind of infantry or anything walking around or whatnot? Maybe engaging?
There's been a talk about that. I'm actually, it's gonna sound kind of weird. I actually don't want humans to be present on the battlefield at all. I've just kind of gotten, you know, I've coming up on 7 years in the AAA industry, and I've just gotten a little burned out on violence and stuff like that. So, like blowing up robots, I'm okay with, but I don't really want to be shooting people. I have 3 young kids that like watching me make the game and also play it, and it's just not something that I think really adds a whole lot to it. You can have vehicles and other things that provide that sense of scale without actually having to blow up people.
That makes a lot of sense.
Fair enough.
For our next question, would it be possible to have a capture and hold style game mode involving fixed super weapons that would bombard enemy bases or waypoints? Maybe an emplacement could be timed to shoot, you know, at specific intervals.
Yeah, as like a standalone game mode, you know, like I said before, it could always be added. But really in the campaign mode, a lot of these game modes will kind of organically happen, which is kind of the whole point of it, where it's not just deploy into a battle, but things happen to where we need to hold this area. Those game modes just organically happen because that's the need of the overall strategy that you have right now. And like, one of the things is there will be some kind of game-changing things that you can build in a territory, and I'm going to kind of reveal the secret, but you know, you can build a massive ground-based railgun that will help you bombard neighboring territories. And if somebody comes in and tries attacking that while it's being built or after it's being built and you want to defend that, then it does become a, you know, hold this area, defend against the attack while we continue to bombard them, and then we'll counterattack once we've fought them off and everything like that. So those kind of game modes will happen organically just through the overall strategy of the campaign.
Now that sounds really interesting because I think the question was intended to be, you know, within a single match, you know, bombarding other MAVs that are in the game with you. But this is more like the overarching campaign stuff where you're assaulting territories that are essentially nearby maps. Is that right?
Yes.
Wow, that actually sounds pretty interesting. Thank you for the information on that. Moving on to our next question, actually, the MAV parts, when you're building a MAV, they currently have listed prices and in-game credits. So how will MAV's in-game economy work? What ways can you earn or lose in-game credits?
So this is another interesting question because I have to reiterate, MAV is really divided into 2 different categories of gameplay. There are the arcade battles, or the free battles as people like to call them, where it's just, you know, somebody has an arena server or a siege server set up and you're just going and playing in those. They're just one-off battles. There's no persistence, or, well, I mean, you get, you know, level up rewards and stuff like that, so like pilot rank from them, but there's no inventory management or anything like that. those are not going to have an economy at all. Basically, you can just use whatever parts you want to go into those battles and play with no consequences. You get blown up, it's not a big deal. In the campaign mode, though, you will have to replace any damaged or destroyed parts. And whenever you destroy somebody else and you capture the territory, you will actually be able to salvage a lot of their destroyed parts, which adds another strategy element to it, where you want to, if you can, just destroy their cockpit, you have a higher percentage chance of actually salvaging the rest of their MAV parts that you can then use. But if you blow up all their MAV parts while you're trying to destroy them, then all those parts are blown up. Your reward is actually less, just in an organic way, from how the battle went about. And in that, you'll get a constant influx of money from the territories that you control, and you'll be spending that money progressing your basically your tech tree. How we talked about the tiers of parts. You'll progress that tier to where you're unlocking parts that are available to you, and then you will be kind of managing your own inventory and your own personal economy with going out and going into battle. And it will have some gameplay implications. If you have this really good part but is really expensive, you may be more hesitant to take that into battle. Maybe there's only specific types of battles that you want to take that into, so you have a very specific build centered around that. And now it becomes a lot more important to armor that. Maybe the part is not that weak, but because it's so expensive, it warrants putting the extra armor on it and everything like that. So there will be a really big dynamic economy, because you will have a constant money sink from the battles that you fight. I mean, even if you win, you're still going to have some cost that comes along with that. So playing kind of an economic warfare game to where you take low-cost parts into a battle, even though you're getting destroyed and you're taking a loss, you're trying to destroy some of their high-value targets, is also a viable way of playing.
Well, thank you for clarifying. It sounds really interesting, the differences you're setting up between just the kind of arcade-style arenas and the campaign server with the ongoing persistence. Related to that campaign server thing, and the next question, so you have these currently just free-for-all arenas. When you have campaign team battles, will you be deploying on edges of the map?
Yeah. I think that for the campaign mode deployments, there will have to be different places that you can deploy into. Otherwise, people will kind of, because you'll be fighting over the same battlefields, people will know the map and will be able to just start bombarding certain locations if they have the range. And people have a tendency to min-max that type of stuff. So there will be a way to where you'll be able to choose locations to spawn in on, and I want there to be enough of them to where you don't get that overlap, to where there's not that chance to where they can just bombard all of them and prevent you from coming in, or have a good chance of randomly guessing it. So there'll probably be anywhere between 5 and 10 different locations that you can deploy onto a map whenever you're going into these battles in campaign mode.
For the next follow-up question, will where you deploy have any connection with who controls the adjacent territory? Is there actual orientation between the map and the overarching world map?
It's not something that's currently planned. That would be really cool. I would have to spend some time thinking on it to make sure that, like, I don't want to have to create 9 different versions of the same map depending on who controls the ones around it. So if I can find a way to do it to where I don't have to create a whole lot of extra content, then that sounds awesome, because it provides an in-battle strategy element based on what's going on in the overall game, which I think is always awesome whenever you get that mixing of elements between the two, the overall strategy of the territories versus the actual battles for the territories. I'm always trying to cross that membrane as much as possible.
Kip, if you had a comment.
It's nice to see the meta game being linked back into the actual shooting game, because sometimes you end up with the two being disconnected from each other, and then it kind of feels hollow.
Yeah, it's like I said, it's really important for me to make sure that you always feel like you're making an impact. So whether you're in battle and you just say you're in battle and you just blew up a building, that should have an impact on what is going on in the overall game, because I want you to always be able to feel like you're contributing. Even if all you did in that battle was you blew up that building and then you got destroyed, I want you to still feel like, well, hey, at least I blew up that building. I know that they're going to get less resources from that territory now. And also vice versa. You place that building and now you have another valuable asset in that territory that makes it to where you're getting more resources every kind of tick from that territory, but you also need to be able to defend it or replace it if it gets blown up.
Okay, thank you for your comments on this section of questions. It's been really illuminating.
All right. Stay tuned for part 2 of the MAV Special Concast.